Imagine that you play the violin in a way that no one in history had ever seen. That people in theaters stand up, shout, cry. That some faint. That a man in the stalls swears he saw a dark figure guiding your bow from behind. And that you, instead of denying it, simply smile. That was Niccolò Paganini. And the problem wasn't that people believed he had sold his soul to the devil. The problem was that he let them believe it. This is the real story of how a man turned a physical deformity into the most feared gift in European music. And how that same myth, which he himself fed for decades, ended up haunting him even after his death. Paganini was born in Genoa in 1782, the third of 6 children of a dock worker who played the mandolin at night. From a very young age, it was clear that Niccolò was different. Not only musically, but physically different. His fingers were extraordinarily long and flexible. His joints bent in directions that shouldn't be possible. He could reach intervals on the violin that other musicians would need 2 hands to cover. What was impossible for anyone else was, for him, a natural position. Today, doctors have a name for that: Marfan syndrome, possibly combined with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Connective tissue disorders that make joints hypermobile. Diseases that also explain why he was extremely thin, why his skin had a strange color, why he tired easily, and why his health progressively declined throughout his life. But in 1800, no one knew that. What the public saw was a man with a corpse-like appearance, with the fingers of a supernatural creature, performing on the violin things that no human being should be able to do. And the rumor began on its own. They said his mother had made a pact. That at night, before concerts, he was seen talking to himself in the dressing room. That in certain theaters, when the candles were put out, a shadow could be seen behind him on stage. Paganini knew it, and he never denied it. There is a very specific reason why he kept that silence. Paganini understood, before anyone else in the history of classical music, that mystery sells. That people don't pay just to hear notes. They pay to see something they cannot explain. They pay to feel fear and pleasure at the same time. So he let the myth grow. At the end of this video, I'm going to share with you the best book I've read about how a composer's mind works in its most extreme moments. It completely changes how you understand what you're about to hear. But first, let's continue with Paganini. In 1805, at 22 years old, he got his first official position. Musical director at the court of Lucca, under Elisa Bonaparte, Napoleon's sister. It was there that he began to perfect not only his technique, but his character. He appeared on stage dressed in black. Slow movements, almost theatrical. An expression that shifted between ecstasy and pain. And then, when the bow touched the strings, something the audience described as impossible. He played entire passages on a single string, after cutting the other 3 on stage. He used differently tuned strings to create sounds no one had ever heard. He performed trills, leaps, and artificial harmonics at a speed that professional violinists watched from the audience, knowing they could never do it, and not fully understanding why. Goethe saw him perform and wrote that it was impossible for it to be human. Schubert left one of his concerts and said he would never listen to him again because he had been convinced that his own music was worthless. And then Paganini made the most calculated mistake of his life. He decided not to publish his scores. Never. Not a single one of the most difficult pieces. He kept them under lock and key, lent handwritten copies only to a few, and made sure that while he lived no one else could play what he played. It was the strategy of a marketing genius 2 centuries before marketing existed as a concept. If no one could replicate him, no one could replace him. And if no one could replace him, he had to stay alive for the music to exist. Here is where I want to pause, because there is a book that connects directly with what you've just heard. It's called Chopin's Last Manuscript by Elizabeth Allen Kellum, and you have the direct link in the description. What makes this book special is that it enters the same territory Paganini never revealed. The mind of the composer when he knows time is running out. Chopin at the end, trying to finish something that perhaps no one will hear, struggling with the same obsession with legacy that consumed Paganini. It's impossible to read it without thinking about what you've just heard. If this story has interested you, That book is the next logical step. Now, Paganini's decline is as fascinating as his rise. And it's where the myth he built turned against him in the worst possible way. From 1828 onward, he toured all over Europe, becoming the first true superstar of classical music in the modern sense. Vienna, Paris, London. Crowds waiting in the streets. Tickets sold weeks in advance. Entrepreneurs offering him fortunes. Paganini negotiated his own contracts, demanded percentages of the revenue, accumulated a wealth no musician of his time had ever reached. But his body was breaking down. Syphilis, which he contracted in his youth, progressed. The treatments of the time, based on mercury, slowly poisoned him. He lost his teeth. His skin became even more translucent. His voice almost completely disappeared in his final years. Chronic laryngitis left him barely able to speak above a whisper. And yet he kept playing. Until he couldn't anymore. In 1840, in Nice, Niccolò Paganini died at the age of 57. And then the strangest part of his story began. The Bishop of Nice refused to grant him a Christian burial. The official reason was that Paganini had not received the last rites. But the real reason was the myth he himself had fed for 40 years. The Catholic Church could not bury in sacred ground a man whom half of Europe considered, quite literally, an agent of the devil. His son Achille spent 5 years fighting Rome. 5 years. During that time, Paganini's body was kept in a basement, then on a ship anchored in the port of Genoa, then in a private villa. Neighbors complained. Stories circulated about noises at night in the places where it was kept. Someone swore they had heard a violin coming from the coffin. The myth did not die with him, kept growing over his corpse. In 1845, the Vatican finally relented. He was buried in Parma, then moved again. And in 1876, 36 years after his death, his remains finally arrived at the cemetery of La Valletta in Parma, where they remain today.